I am Emily Carter, 32 years old. And last month, my world shattered at a family dinner in Seattle. The house my cherished grandparents left me turned into a battleground for my entitled sister and my complicit parents. They had always showered her with everything while I scraped by on my own. That night, she slapped me across the face, shoved me toward the door with brutal force, and snarled, "Get out of my house." My parents just sat there, their eyes cold and unmoving as I stumbled out into the yard, my arm bruised and my heart pounding. I stood under the streetlight, staring at the locked door, my breath visible in the chilly air. A week later, a package landed on their doorstep. My mother blew up my phone with 45 missed calls, her voice frantically pleading. It was all a mistake. I texted back 3 words, "Get out now." Before coming to my story, I want to know what time you are listening and what city you are in. I am happy to know how far my story spreads. A week earlier, I sat at my apartment's dining table in Seattle, arranging plates for a family dinner I hoped would mend old wounds. I'd spent hours cooking lasagna from Grandma Evelyn's recipe, the smell of garlic and tomato filling my small space. My sister, 3 years older, arrived late with my parents, her eyes scanning my modest home with a familiar sneer. My mother, Margaret Hayes, handed me a store-bought dessert, muttering about traffic. My father, David Hayes, barely nodded, already asking for a beer. I forced a smile, setting out appetizers, determined to keep things civil. Conversation started light work my parents' book club. Sophia Bennett, my sister, lounged in a chair, scrolling her phone, barely joining in. I mentioned my latest coding project, a budgeting app I'd pitched at work. Margaret waved it off, saying, "That's nice, Emily, but let's hear about Sophia's new venture." Sophia launched into a story about her struggling startup, a fitness app that hadn't landed funding. "Investors don't get my vision," she complained, tossing her hair. David nodded sympathetically. "You'll find the right one, sweetheart." I bit my lip, used to their favoritism. The mood shifted when Margaret brought up the house my grandparents, Evelyn Brooks and George Brooks, left me. "Have you updated the kitchen yet?" she asked, her tone too casual. Sophia was saying it would be perfect for her. I froze fork halfway to my mouth. "It's my house," I said evenly. Sophia leaned forward, her voice sharp. "You don't need all that space, Emily. I'm starting over after my app tanked. It'd be better with me." My chest tightened. "Grandma and Grandpa left it to me, not you." David cleared his throat. "It's a family house. Think about sharing, Emily," Margaret chimed in. "Sophia's in a tough spot. You're doing fine." I pushed back, voice steady despite my rising anger. "Fine. I've worked for everything while you've handed Sophia whatever she wanted." Sophia's face darkened. "Don't act superior just because you code apps nobody uses." The insult stung, but I held my ground. "At least I don't expect handouts." The table went silent. Then Sophia stood her chair, scraping the floor. "You're so selfish," she spat, stepping closer. Before I could react, her hand cracked across my cheek, the sting sharp and hot. She grabbed my arm, shoving me toward the door. "Get out of my house," she yelled as if my apartment were hers. I stumbled backward, tripping over the threshold, and fell onto the grass outside my arm, scraping the pavement. Margaret and David sat frozen, their faces blank. Not a word of protest. I pulled myself up, tasting blood from my lip, and glared at the shut door. Something snapped inside me. "Game over," I whispered to myself, brushing dirt off my sleeve. I drove to a nearby coffee shop, my hands shaking on the wheel. My phone lit up with a text from my colleague Laura Jenkins. "You okay? Call me." I dialed her number, my voice low as I recounted the fight. "They want the house, Laura. They think it's theirs." Her response was firm. "You need to protect what's yours, Emily. Start digging." That night, alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop, pulling up the house's deed and Grandma Evelyn's will. I wasn't giving up without a fight. The next morning, I sat at my desk, the sting of Sophia's slap still fresh on my cheek. My laptop glowed with the deed to the house Grandma Evelyn Brooks and Grandpa George Brooks left me. Their words from the will echoed in my mind. "Emily, you showed us true love. I wasn't letting my sister or parents take that away." I opened a browser, pulling up property records for our Seattle neighborhood. The house, valued at $200,000 when I inherited it 3 years ago, now sat at nearly $1 million. The tech boom had transformed our street into a hot market. My hands steadied as I realized the power I held. I dialed Laura Jenkins, my colleague and closest confidant. Her voice sharp over the phone. "Emily, you need to lock this down. They're banking on you caving." She suggested a lawyer she knew, a property expert named Susan Patel. I called Susan, explaining the situation. "My sisters demand my parents silence the house. Send me the will and deed, Susan said briskly. Washington law is clear on inheritance. Let's see what we're working with. By noon, I emailed her the documents, my fingers trembling, not from fear, but from purpose. Susan called back that afternoon. Good news, she said. The will is airtight, signed with 3 witnesses and a doctor's note confirming your grandparents' mental clarity. Your parents and sister have been living there without permission, technically squatting. I leaned back, stunned, squatting. Sophia had been crashing in the guest room, claiming it as her office for her failing fitness app. Margaret and David stayed over, often acting like the house was theirs. Susan continued, You can issue an eviction notice 72 hours under state law or sell it outright. Your call. I dug deeper, pulling up old emails from Margaret. Months ago, she'd asked about the house's wiring, claiming Sophia needed stable internet for her startup. David had texted about the garage, saying it'd be perfect for Sophia's equipment. It hit me they'd been planning this for months, assuming I'd roll over. I remembered Grandma Evelyn's voice, calm but firm one evening when I was 16. We'd sat in her garden debugging code on her ancient desktop. You're tougher than they think, Emily, she'd said, her hands steady on the keyboard. Don't let their noise drown you out. Grandpa George had nodded, tweaking a circuit board. Build your own path, kid. Laura met me for coffee that evening at a shop near Pike Place Market. This is your moment, she said, stirring her latte. They've taken enough, your college fund, your time, your peace. Demand what's yours. I nodded, my resolve hardening. Back home, I spread out the documents. The will deed and a market analysis I'd run through my real estate app. The numbers were clear. Selling the house to a young family, the Millers, for $850,000 was locked in papers signed last week. I hadn't told my family, knowing they'd fight it. I drafted a plan with Susan. We'd send a package to the house, certified copies of the will, the sale contract, and an eviction notice. The Millers, a couple with 2 kids, loved the garden and the smart home system I'd coded. They'd move in next month. I pictured Sophia's smug face when she opened that package. Margaret's panic. David's silence crumbling. For 30 years, I'd been the one to compromise, to step aside. Not this time. Sitting with those documents, my mind drifted to the years of being overlooked in our Seattle home. Growing up, my grandparents, Evelyn Brooks and George Brooks, were my anchor. Their cozy house with its creaky porch and blooming garden was where I felt valued. They'd sit me at their old PC teaching me to code simple games. Their patience endless. You've got a spark, Emily. Grandma Evelyn would say, her eyes bright. Grandpa George would chuckle, tweaking a motherboard. Keep building, kid. You'll outshine them all. Meanwhile, my parents, Margaret Hayes and David Hayes, poured everything into my sister, Sophia Bennett, 3 years older. When I was 15, I needed a laptop for a coding camp. Margaret said, we're tight on funds. A week later, Sophia got a brand new MacBook for her startup ideas. I worked weekends at a coffee shop to buy a used Dell, its keys sticking from overuse. At 16, Sophia got a shiny SUV for her birthday while I rode the city bus, my backpack heavy with library books. Sophia has big dreams, David would say, shrugging off my straight A report cards. You're fine, Emily. Fine. That word burned. My college fund was another casualty. At 18, I learned it had vanished into Sophia's first app venture, a social media platform that crashed in 4 months. Unexpected expenses, Margaret mumbled when I asked. I worked 30 hours a week through college coding freelance apps to cover tuition, still pulling a 3.8 GPA in computer science. Sophia dropped out of 2 universities each time with my parents' excuses and cash for her next vision. I'd call Grandma Evelyn, voice shaky, venting about the unfairness. They're blind to your worth, she'd say, her voice steady over tea in her kitchen. But you're stronger than their mistakes. One night when I was 17, I sat on their porch, tears streaming after Margaret canceled my science fair trip to fund Sophia's coding boot camp. Grandpa George handed me a soldering iron. Fix what's broken, Emily, starting with yourself. Their belief kept me going. When they passed 3 years ago, their will left me the house with a letter in Evelyn's neat handwriting. Emily, you gave us love when others only took. This house is yours to protect. Sophia scoffed at the reading, tossing her hair. Good luck with that fixer-upper. I poured my savings into the house, coding a smart system to control lights and security, preserving the garden Evelyn loved. Sophia, meanwhile, racked up debt on her fitness app, always expecting a bailout. Margaret and David never questioned her. Their praise endless. Sophia's a risk taker, they'd say, ignoring my late-night coding sessions to meet work deadlines. I'd overhear them at holiday dinners whispering about giving Sophia the house for stability. Stability as if I hadn't earned it. The final straw was a memory from 2 years ago. I'd found an old photo of me and Evelyn in the garden, her arm around me, both of us smiling. Tucked behind it was another note from her. Emily, you're the one who carries our love forward. Don't let them steal your fire. That note now in my desk drawer fueled my anger as I sat with the deed. For 30 years, I'd been pushed aside. My efforts dismissed my inheritance targeted. Sophia's slap wasn't just physical. It was the culmination of their entitlement. I wasn't just protecting a house. I was reclaiming my worth. Back at my apartment, I finalized the plan with Susan. The house sale to the Millers. The young couple with 2 kids was locked in at $850,000 papers signed and notarized. Susan had prepared a package certified copies of Grandma Evelyn's will to sale contract and a 72-hour eviction notice under Washington law. This will hit them hard, she said over the phone, her voice calm but firm. They've been squatting illegally. You're within your rights. I nodded, picturing Sophia's smug grin fading. I overnighted the package to the house, my hands steady as I handed it to the courier. The next day, I left Seattle for a work conference in Portland, needing distance. My phone stayed on silent, but I knew the storm was coming. Laura texted, package delivered. Brace yourself. By evening, my voicemail was flooded. Margaret's first message was shaky. Emily, what's this about a sale? Call me now. Sophia's was pure venom. You're not getting away with this. David left a single gruff message. We need to talk. I ignored them all, focusing on my conference keynote, a pitch for my budgeting app. It felt like a small rebellion prioritizing my work over their chaos. 2 days later, Susan called with an update. They opened the package. She said, Your mother's been calling my office nonstop claiming it's a mistake. Sophia's hired a lawyer, some guy named Michael Reed. I smirked, knowing the will's strength. 3 witnesses, a doctor's note untouchable after 3 years under Washington's statute of limitations. Let them try, I told Susan. What's next? She explained the eviction process. The Millers would take possession in 3 weeks, and the sheriff could enforce the notice if my family resisted. They're panicking, she added. Sophia screaming about her rights to the house. I pictured the scene at the house. Sophia pacing the living room she'd claimed as her office, ripping open the package to find the sale contract. Margaret clutching the will, her face pale as she read Evelyn's words, naming me sole heir. David silent as always, staring at the eviction notice. They'd assumed I'd cave hand over the house like I'd handed over my college fund, my time, my dignity. But I'd learned from Evelyn's quiet strength her lessons in standing firm. You don't owe them anything, she told me once, her hand squeezing mine as we debugged code together. Sophia's lawyer called me that afternoon, his tone slick. My client believes there's been a misunderstanding. Michael said, The house is a family asset. I cut him off. The will says it's mine. Check the records, he stammered, mentioning a possible contest. You're 3 years too late, I said, my voice cold. The sale's binding. Tell Sophia to pack. Susan confirmed later that Michael backed off, admitting the case was dead on arrival. Washington law didn't bend for entitled siblings. I stayed in Portland another day, letting my family stew. Laura sent updates. Sophia had posted a rant on social media calling me a traitor. Margaret tried rallying cousins claiming I'd stolen their legacy. I didn't respond. The Millers, unaware of the drama, emailed me a thank you note gushing about the garden and the smart system I'd coded. Our kids can't wait to move in, they wrote. I smiled, knowing Evelyn and George would have loved their excitement. Back in Seattle, I met Laura at a diner near my office. They're falling apart, she said, sipping coffee. Sophia's lawyer dropped her. Your parents are begging for a meeting. I shook my head. No meetings. They made their choice. I'd spent decades swallowing their demands, but the eviction notice was my line in the sand. Sophia's slapped their silence. It all led here. I wasn't just selling a house. I was breaking free. 3 days after the package arrived, the fallout began. Sophia's lawyer, Michael Reed, sent a final email admitting defeat. Washington's 3-year statute of limitations on will contest had expired, and the notarized documents were ironclad. The Millers, the new buyers, were set to move into the house in 18 days. Sophia, Margaret, and David had 72 hours to vacate or the sheriff would step in. Susan called me at my Portland hotel, her voice steady. They're out of moves. Emily, the house is legally gone. I leaned back, a quiet satisfaction settling in. For once, their entitlement had no leverage. Back in Seattle, Sophia's world unraveled. Her fitness app startup, already struggling with missed loan payments, collapsed when creditors caught wind of her unstable housing. The bank seized her assets under Washington's lien laws, leaving her with nothing but a leased car and a pile of debt. She posted a desperate plea on social media, framing herself as a victim of my greed. Cousins and aunts flooded my inbox with accusations parroting her story. I forwarded them the will and sale contract, letting Grandma Evelyn's words speak for themselves. Most went silent, their support for Sophia fading as the truth spread. Margaret and David faced their own reckoning. To cover Sophia's startup loans, they'd refinanced their own home 2 years ago, a risky move in Seattle's volatile market. With the house gone and no bailout from me, they couldn't keep up with payments. They filed for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, a public record that hit the local news. Their suburban home, once a status symbol, was foreclosed. They moved into a cramped rental apartment downtown, their social circle shrinking as friends distanced themselves from the scandal. Margaret's book club stopped inviting her. David's golf buddies canceled their outings. I watched from afar back at my Seattle apartment. Laura met me for lunch at a cafe near Lake Union, her eyes wide as she scrolled through the latest headlines. Sophia's posting about moving into a motel, she said, shaking her head. Your parents' foreclosure is all over the neighborhood forum. I sipped my coffee, feeling no guilt. For 32 years, they'd taken from me my college fund, my opportunities, my peace. Now their choices had built their own cage. Grandma Evelyn's voice echoed in my mind from a night we'd coded a light sensor for her garden. Actions have consequences, Emily, she'd said, wiring a circuit. Yours and theirs. Sophia tried calling once, her voice cracking through a voicemail. You've ruined me, Emily. Where am I supposed to go? I didn't reply. She'd made her bed when she raised her hand against me when she demanded what wasn't hers. Margaret sent texts begging for a meeting to fix this. I blocked her number. David left a message, his tone flat. You've gone too far. I deleted it without a second thought. Their attempts to guilt me felt hollow, a last gasp of control slipping away. The local paper ran a story on the house sale mentioning the family dispute without my name. Neighbors who'd seen me tend Evelyn's garden for years sent supportive emails. Your grandparents would be proud. One wrote, the Millers sent photos of their kids playing in the yard, the roses blooming under their care. I smiled, knowing the house was alive with new memories just as Evelyn and George wanted. Laura and I toasted at the cafe, clinking glasses of iced tea. You flipped the script, she said, grinning. They thought they'd break you. I nodded my chest light. The dominoes had fallen, not because I pushed, but because they'd built a house of cards. Sophia's slapped their silence. Their greed had all led here. I wasn't reveling in their pain, but I wasn't carrying it either. For the first time, I felt untethered. 2 months later, I stood in my new bungalow in Seattle, sunlight streaming through the windows. The small house tucked in an up-and-coming neighborhood was half the size of Grandma Evelyn's, but perfect for me. I'd painted the walls a soft gray, hung a photo of Evelyn and George in the garden, and planted rose cuttings from their old yard. With the $850,000 from the house sale, I'd invested in my dream, an education app teaching kids to code, partnering with Laura Jenkins. I launched it last month and early downloads were climbing fast. My new life felt like a clean slate. I'd cut all ties with my family. Sophia Bennett, my sister, had spiraled further after losing her startup. With her assets seized, she couldn't afford her leased car or motel rent. Last I heard, she was working part-time at a coffee shop, living in a shared apartment with strangers. Her social media silent. Seattle's tough job market offered no mercy for her lack of experience. Margaret Hayes and David Hayes, my parents, were hit harder. Their Chapter 7 bankruptcy stripped them of their suburban home, forcing them into a tiny rental near the city's edge. Their social standing crumbled. Margaret's book club dropped her, and David's former colleagues avoided him. A local blog mentioned their foreclosure, tying it to family mismanagement. They'd become pariahs in their own circle. The dominoes had fallen not because I pushed, but because they'd built a house of cards. Sophia slapped their silence. Their greed had all led here. I wasn't reveling in their pain, but I wasn't carrying it either. For the first time, I felt untethered. 2 months later, I stood in my new bungalow in Seattle, sunlight streaming through the windows. The small house tucked in an up-and-coming neighborhood was half the size of Grandma Evelyn's, but perfect for me. I'd painted the walls a soft gray, hung a photo of Evelyn and George in the garden, and planted rose cuttings from their old yard. With the $850,000 from the house sale, I'd invested in my dream, an education app teaching kids to code, partnering with Laura Jenkins. I launched it last month and early downloads were climbing fast. My new life felt like a clean slate. I'd cut all ties with my family. Sophia Bennett, my sister, had spiraled further after losing her startup. With her assets seized, she couldn't afford her leased car or motel rent. Last I heard, she was working part-time at a coffee shop, living in a shared apartment with strangers. Her social media silent. Seattle's tough job market offered no mercy for her lack of experience. Margaret Hayes and David Hayes. My parents were hit harder. Their Chapter 7 bankruptcy stripped them of their suburban home, forcing them into a tiny rental near the city's edge. Their social standing crumbled. Margaret's book club dropped her, and David's former colleagues avoided him. A local blog mentioned their foreclosure, tying it to family mismanagement. They'd become pariahs in their own circle.